Good evening. This is Brown, and tonight it gives me great pleasure to talk about Ghost Rider issue number 25. You Can't Go Home Again. So this was a particularly memorable issue in the sense that not only was it an anniversary issue, and it was double-sized, but it also marks a turning point in the series that really shakes up its status quo. And so, before I get into why that is in the actual story, a little bit of background first. So, this particular issue came out in 1992, and it marked the point wherein the book had been around for 2 years at this point. And so, this particular version of Ghost Rider was created by writer Howard Mackie and artist Javier Saltrez in 1990. And the first year of the book was marked by a surprising amount of success, both from an artistic standpoint as well as from a writing standpoint, because there was a strong sense of mystery that was ever present within the book within its first year, and even into its second year as well. But in its first year, though, this mysterious new character caught a lot of readers, by surprise in terms of, say, the success that the book had, and namely the fact that it was able to keep company with, hot-selling books such as the various X-Men books or the various Spider-Man books at the time. And so for a character that was brand spanking new, that was an impressive feat. And it also caught a lot of people behind the scenes off guard, namely like the creative team, as well as a lot of the, editorial bigwigs at Marvel, because they were thinking that, the book would only last a year, if that. But the fact that not only did it last a year, but it continued, to go on and, sell like hotcakes and bring in, say, a steady group of readers that formed a loyal fan base for the book. Marvel knew that, well, hey, it caught us by surprise, but we've got a hit on our hands. And so the basic gist of it was the fact that this new version of Ghost Rider at this point in the series was established as, not being the exact same Ghost Rider as, say, the original Johnny Blaze / Zarathos Ghost Rider from the original series. Like, there does seem to be a connection, or there more than likely is a connection, but we don't know what that connection is at this point, because this particular Ghost Rider is clearly tied to the same version of hell that the original Ghost Rider, aka Zarathos, was tied to. And so there's a connection in that regard. But other than that, there's this case of amnesia that he has where he doesn't know, he knows his purpose. That he's basically the spirit of vengeance, and he acts on behalf of those who have been, murdered or, grievously injured, by way of violent criminals. But he doesn't know why that is. He doesn't know, why he was or how he was created. And so all he knows is, he has his mission and he does what he does. But he had a human host in the person of one Danny Ketch, who was a young adult who unfortunately met with tragedy by way of his sister Barbara Ketch being grievously injured one night by criminals. And in the process of trying to get her to safety, he came across this mysterious motorcycle in this junkyard, and once it started the gas cap started glowing and he touched it, his blood-stained hands, the blood of his sister Barbara, triggered a transformation once his hands touched the gas cap, and he found himself transformed into this new Ghost Rider, who basically, took the fight to the criminals. Like, whenever innocent blood was spilled nearby, Danny Ketch would find himself transformed into Ghost Rider. And his base of operations was the Cypress Hill Cemetery. And why that was at this point in time, we don't know. It just is, or was. And so, for the first year of the book, there was a sort of back and forth between Ghost Rider and Danny Ketch in the sense that, Danny didn't know if Ghost Rider was good or evil. I mean, because he certainly took the fight to, many villains, but he also put them through a lot of hell. I mean, something, say, that was more severe than a beating that Spider-Man or Captain America would handle out. And oftentimes there'd be grievous bodily harm, or even worse, the penance stare, wherein, Ghost Rider would, basically force his victims, or his criminal victims, to experience the pain and misery that they themselves had brought out upon other people. And so oftentimes this would leave the criminals in a sort of vegetative state, wherein they wished that Ghost Rider had killed them, because basically them being hit with all that pain at once just crushed them. And so Danny Ketch, when Ghost Rider would turn back into Danny Ketch, Danny would remember these as almost like vivid nightmares, except he was awake. And so this was taking a toll on his sanity, and not to mention his personal life, because, while he did have a, group of friends, and he had a family in the person of his mother, he had a girlfriend named Stacy, he didn't feel safe in trying to confide in them that, hey, for some reason I turn into this flaming skull-headed demonic biker dude whenever innocent blood is spilled, and I do some traumatizing shit to some bad guys. Yeah, they deserve it, but at the same time, it scares me what I can do and what I have done. And it's like he can't talk to anyone about this, or he feels like he can't talk to anyone. And so, while some of the people in his circle would try and reach out to him because they knew that something was wrong, things kind of came to a head when his sister, who at this point was in a coma, was horrifically murdered by the vampire Blackout, who Ghost Rider had come into battle with in his first couple of issues, and had horrifically disfigured Blackout's face. And so Blackout, at this point, had figured out who Ghost Rider really was, and seeing as how he knew that Ghost Rider was really Danny Ketch, he figured out the best way to hurt Danny Ketch was to murder his sister. And so once that happened, a whole bunch of stuff changed. Like, Danny became more bloodthirsty in terms of, say, how he went after criminals, whereas Ghost Rider started to become a little more introspective, because I guess you could say the emotional shock of all this, really got to him. Plus the fact that, other people that he came into contact with, would, ask him what's more important, avenging the innocent, or, preventing, their, deaths. And so, that was something that, started to, I guess you could say, almost humanize him. And so it was very fascinating, because you had, Danny Ketch and Ghost Rider basically rubbing off on one another, but then come issue 14, Johnny Blaze, the host of the original Ghost Rider, came back into the picture. And so Johnny Blaze had basically been living a peaceful life with his wife and 2 children, but then when he found out that this new Ghost Rider had come onto the scene, he basically just had a, what you'd call a PTSD, an episode of PTSD, because this is a guy who was literally bound to a demon from hell, for several years, and experienced a lot of trauma within his own book. And so, at the end of that book, he and Zarathos had been separated, and basically, he was free to live his life. And for a time, he and his wife Roxanne were living a happy life together, raising their 2 children. But once the news came out that Ghost Rider was back, he came to a conclusion that this must be Zarathos come to walk the earth in a different form. And so he basically ran away from his family and, took on this sort of almost Captain Ahab mentality, wherein Ghost Rider was the white whale. And so when he finally found Danny Ketch, the two of them, had this long conversation wherein, Johnny Blaze caught Danny up to, who and what Ghost Rider really was. And so Danny had already gotten some clue as to, Ghost Rider's true nature, by way of the villain Nightmare, but at that point, both he and Ghost Rider, were shown bits and pieces of the past of, the Zarathos version of Ghost Rider. And so while Danny was watching this, Ghost Rider had basically, taken it all in and said, these memories mean nothing to me. And so once again, we're having a bit where not only are we, the readers, being caught up on, the mythos of the original Ghost Rider, but so too is Danny Ketch. And you also get a look into, just how traumatized, the character of Johnny Blaze is, not only from having survived his experience with, from being a host of the original Ghost Rider, but, just, the lingering memories of it all and how it all came running back to him, when he saw the news reports of Ghost Rider being back on the scene. And so, once Danny Ketch transforms into Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze, tries to, take the fight to him by sort of using a combination of dark magic that he'd learned, in which, he was loath to use, but he felt he had no choice in order to hold Ghost Rider in place. But something weird happened. When Johnny tried to use his shotgun on Ghost Rider, Ghost Rider, in an effort to, stop Johnny Blaze, reached out, to grab the shotgun, but something weird happened. Namely, his hellfire went from him, into, Johnny Blaze's shotgun. And from that moment on, Johnny Blaze found that, his shotgun, seldom ran out of ammo, and it fired rounds that could injure or kill a demon, in this case, Ghost Rider. And he grievously injured Ghost Rider, in fact, nearly killing him, and in the process, nearly prevented Ghost Rider from getting to, Blackout, who had resurfaced and was stepping up his campaign of vengeance against Danny Ketch and Ghost Rider. And so, once all these parties converged, Johnny Blaze, realized that, this particular Ghost Rider, for the moment was on the side of good. And so he reluctantly put aside his grievances and helped Ghost Rider to apprehend Blackout. And so the two of them, had a heart-to-heart wherein Johnny, sort of said, hey, I don't know, who you are. I don't know what your story is, but from what I'm seeing, I'm starting to think that you're not the one I thought you were, but, at the same time, I'm seeing a lot of similarities here. And so, he actually starts to serve as something of a friend of sorts to Ghost Rider, and a mentor, and almost like, father figure, towards Danny Ketch, because after Danny, when Ghost Rider turns back into Danny Ketch, Johnny Blaze, basically, shows him how to defend himself, because he's trying to point out that, hey, there's going to be times where you might come up against a foe that keeps you from turning into Ghost Rider, and when you can't turn into Ghost Rider, how are you going to defend yourself? And so he gives him some, basic lessons as far as self-defense goes. And this sort of boosts Danny Ketch's confidence in being able to, say, have some form of control over his life. And another lesson that Johnny Blaze imparted to Danny Ketch and Ghost Rider is that, he sees a lot of similarities in the sense that the two of them keep trying to fight each other whenever one transforms into the other. And he said that he and Zarathos had the same problem, except from as far as he could tell, whereas Zarathos was a being of pure evil that was reluctantly partnered with Johnny Blaze, this particular Ghost Rider seems to be on the side of good for some unknown reason, even though he doesn't know who or what he himself really is, as in Ghost Rider. And so, considering that this particular Ghost Rider seems to be on the side of good, he tries to, tell them, you two need to work together. Whenever there needs to be a transformation, don't fight it. Just go along with the ride. Help each other out. And so from that point on, Ghost Rider and Danny Ketch would work together in a more beneficial way, to a point where Danny Ketch was starting to have a certain measure of control over his life and was starting to try and sort out things in his personal life, but also trying to use his time to track down certain villains that had eluded Ghost Rider's grasp initially. And so that way, whenever he transformed into Ghost Rider would have his knowledge and be able to use this clues that he picked up to track these villains down and bring them to justice. And Ghost Rider, for his part, became a lot more, I guess you could say, humanized, as I may have mentioned earlier, in the sense that he started to question his purpose a lot more. But at the same time, he put the salvation of the innocent over his need for vengeance. But not to say that he put his mission aside. It's just that, he knew that there was a time and a place for it, if that makes sense. But in issues 21 through 24, you had a closing chapter on an ongoing conflict in the sense of Ghost Rider finally having a showdown with the villain Deathwatch, who had basically been in the series from the beginning, but had acted in a more behind-the-scenes way after a certain point. But here he came to the forefront and attempted to destroy Ghost Rider. And so naturally it didn't work out, and Ghost Rider, while he had been hurt in combat by Deathwatch and his minions, he was able to come out on top and basically kill Deathwatch. And at this point, the villains Snowblind and Zodiac had been killed as well, not necessarily by Ghost Rider, but the fact is they were dead. They were no longer a problem, and so Deathwatch joined that list. And so Ghost Rider, he's left with a feeling of, well, where do we go from here? And so at that point, the readers didn't know either. And so that's where issue 25 comes in. And so I found the title to be very apt. You can't go home again. And you have a point where, because of certain events that happen in this book, both Danny and Ghost Rider are put through a grueling conflict, a ringer, wherein certain traumatic things happen, to the point where there's a change that can't be shaken, or if there's any sort of trauma that's in place, it's going to be a hard time to get over said trauma. But now that I've given you all some background on where how the series started out and where it's gotten to up to this point, I'll go ahead and get into the actual story here. So you can't go home again. It starts off in Queens, wherein a Ghost Rider is on his nightly rounds, and he's attacked by this multi-gun wielding maniac called the Technician, who is killing as many civilians as he can find, be it through gunfire or rocket launchers. And so the spilling of innocent blood is something that definitely draws Ghost Rider, except the Technician knew this. He keeps saying, they told me that you have a thing about innocent blood. Have I spilled enough innocent blood for you? And so it becomes obvious that this guy has been driven insane, somehow, and yet he's able to, hold his own in the sense of, being able to, be a one-man army with all this, high-tech weaponry, and, besieging, this section of the city. And so while Ghost Rider is initially knocked around some by some of the rocket fire, he starts walking towards the guy, and as he does so, the guy switches from rocket fire, as Ghost Rider keeps getting closer and closer to him, to machine gun fire. And so while he's hitting Ghost Rider's just taking it, and while the bullets are penetrating and punching holes through him, he just keeps walking to the guy. And so the guy, he starts freaking out, and then he says, I don't know what half this weaponry does, but this one I know. And so he pulls out this gun that basically fires this sort of concentrated, almost like an explosive round of acid, and it basically just melts Ghost Rider and the ground he's standing on into this corrosive puddle. And so the technician starts basically celebrating and boasting that Ghost Rider was less than nothing, and how he doesn't understand why they wanted Ghost Rider for their capture and study purposes. And he keeps saying they. And so at this point, we don't know who they are. All we know is that, quote unquote, they sent the technician to kill Ghost Rider. And so the technician has seemingly succeeded, except after literally spitting on this corroded, corrosive puddle where Ghost Rider once was, in contempt, spitting, I mean. Suddenly Ghost Rider just bursts out of the puddle, and granted, I mean, he's still corroded and everything, but his body's gradually knitting itself together, and he walks towards the guy, and the technician starts freaking out, and it's a pretty good moment of horror in terms of, say, a comic book portrayal of horror, because not only did we see Ghost Rider just take all the damage that this guy could throw at him, but he literally just came back from being melted. And so at this point, he has the guy by the throat, and then we cut to a different perspective, and we see that all this has been recorded by various technicians working for them, and them, or they, turn out to be this organization called the Firm. And the Firm at this point is established to be a group that specializes in the study and capture of superpowered beings, wherein they study and analyze the abilities of these superpowered beings, and then they keep them in captivity, or they kill them. Usually they kill them when they're done with them. But Ghost Rider has become the latest pet project for the Firm, in the sense that basically he's been fighting crime, but he's been interfering in a lot of criminal enterprises, and a lot of these enterprises in some way kind of tie into the Firm. And so the Firm naturally wants to find out who and what this Ghost Rider really is, but they also want him to be taken care of as far as problems go. And so, the leader of this particular operation is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Stern. And as we go over the security footage, or as I should say, he goes over the security footage from that particular night, wherein Ghost Rider, and the technician fought each other. Mr. Stern's explaining that it was very easy to manipulate this technician, because the technician was basically a mercenary, right? And the technicians are mercenaries for the Firm, and this particular technician was one of the best ones that they had. And so, Stern, kind of gaslit the guy by not only covertly feeding him a series of mind-altering, psychosis-inducing drugs, but also, telling him that he had been fired due to budget cuts and the ghostwriter program taking priority over any of the other projects that the firm had going at the time. And so basically he put this guy on the spot wherein he said, okay, we're firing you, but there might be a way for you to get back in if you can bring in Ghostwriter. And so that's where this guy in a kill crazy frenzy took it upon himself to get Ghostwriter's attention by acting on the knowledge that the firm had of him at the time, which was he was a super powered being who had a thing about innocent blood being spilled. And but because of the technicians' defeat at the hands of the Ghostwriter, they were able to get more data on him, namely the data of how Ghostwriter's penance stare affects the human mind. And so, we, as we were finding this out, we see that in this room, there's in the center of all these scientists and technicians, there's this one particular individual that we initially can't see who they are, but we see them that they're strapped into this almost like harness, Hannibal Lecter style. And eventually we learned that this particular individual is in fact Ghostwriter's old enemy, Blackout. And so it turns out that the firm had somehow acquired Blackout from the authorities, and means that they had, that the creative team has yet to divulge to the readers. But nonetheless, they, I guess, used underhanded means and subterfuge to claim Blackout from the authorities and into their own quarters, into their own facilities, if you will. And so Stern has a mission for Blackout, or an opportunity for Blackout. He basically offers Blackout the opportunity to capture Ghostwriter and bring him in for the firm to study. And once the firm's done with Ghostwriter, they'll fully repair the damage to Blackout's face that Ghostwriter had caused, way back, in the first couple of issues. But also, not only will they, provide Blackout with a new face, but they'll also give Blackout the chance to kill Ghostwriter once they themselves are done studying him. And so, at this point, the Blackout reluctantly agrees to this, but neither party trusts the other. Blackout doesn't trust Stern or the firm, and Stern does not trust Blackout, but he does trust that Blackout will eventually turn on them. Hence why he has surveillance teams, tailing Blackout. And he's also got this tracking device embedded in Blackout's ear. And so, as they're tailing Blackout, it's pretty easy to see where he's going, because once they've taken away any sort of power dampeners that they have on Blackout, Blackout's light dampening abilities have come back into full swing. And as it was mentioned several issues ago, Blackout had mysteriously been gaining greater strength in terms of, say, just how powerful his abilities were. So not only was he becoming physically stronger, but he was becoming, I guess you could, like, his abilities to darken the light around him became greater, as in originally his light dampening abilities only applied to a certain radius, but as we see in this subtle but yet memorable page, you see a whole section of New York, you see the lights going out. And that's, where, the team's like, okay, yeah, we definitely know where Blackout is and where he's headed. And so, but as, Stern predicted, Blackout soon turns on them by way of slaughtering one of the tracking teams that's tailing him. And then he also removes a tracking device from his ear and basically tells Stern and the firm in no uncertain terms, that he doesn't work for anyone anymore, and that, he'll repair his face in his own way in his own time, and all he wants is, Ghost Rider, and to hell with everyone else. And so, since he remembers who Ghost Rider really is, he starts this, campaign of terror against Danny, much like he had several issues before, except this time he targets, his, mother, and, his friend Jack, and his girlfriend Stacy, and Stacy's dad, and basically kidnaps them all and threatens to kill them unless Danny meets him and one-on-one. But he tells him, though, that if Danny turns into Ghost Rider at any point, then Blackout will, pick one of his friends or loved ones and just kill them. And so, or if, he turns into Ghost Rider right off the bat to try and go after Blackout will just kill everyone. And so, Danny, at this point, I mean, while he initially felt that he had some measure of control over his life, he now feels it all just fallen away from him, because prior to that, his mom had celebrated her birthday, which was a nice, joyful occasion, but it was sad, but it was marked with sadness by the fact that, he had tried to reconcile with his ex-girlfriend Stacy, but, she had rebuffed him, saying that, it's too late. I mean, I tried to get you to let me in, but you wouldn't trust me. And so, how can I trust you? And things can't go back to the way they were. And Danny really wants things to go back to the way they were. And so it's like, he's moved forward in a sense that, he's got a measure of control in terms of, say, his partnership or his relationship, I guess you could say, with Ghost Rider. But at the same time, too much damage has been done with his personal life to where, things can't go back to the way they were, unfortunately. And so, he's still reeling from that, when he's hit with this terror campaign, from Blackout. And so, Blackout basically just kidnaps, these people, and, has Danny run around the city until he has him, come back to his own house, where, all four of, the people had been rendered unconscious by Blackout. And Danny's initially thinking that Blackout's murdered them, but, Blackout assures him that, no, they're just unconscious. You're the one I want. And then, Danny, he's wanting to turn to Ghost Rider, and Blackout knows this, and he's got him by the throat, and he's, telling him, go on, fight the urge, because if you turn into Ghost Rider, I guarantee you I will kill at least one of them before, Ghost Rider stops me. So whose life do you want to gamble with? And Danny's, he's, basically, just begging Blackout to, let, his, family and friends go. And he's saying that, basically he doesn't want them to suffer, and Blackout's caused enough suffering already. But then Blackout, he goes on to spiel about how, he's gone through pain every day ever since Ghost Rider took his face. And at first you're thinking, like, what, physical pain? But then, he goes into detail about how basically it's kind of taken a toll on his sanity. Like, every time, he sees a mirror, every time he walks past a window and sees his reflection, it's a constant reminder of what Ghost Rider did to him. And so, in his mind, he's the victim, and not, any of the other people that he's killed or hurt over the years. And so, at this point, when it becomes clear that, Blackout is going to kill Danny, and he more than likely will kill his friends and loved ones who are, run unconscious in the house, Danny, tries to, get out of Blackout's grip and, kicks him in the crotch. But at that point, Blackout just chunks Danny through a window and follows him, and, tells him that, he was initially going to keep Danny around to talk to for a bit. There were some things that he was wanting to get off his chest, but Danny just really pissed him off, and so now he's just going to kill him. Like, he was planning on killing him, but he was going to talk with him first and then kill him. But then he basically says, as to your friends and loved ones in there, you'll never know what happens to them. And so at that point, he literally rips Danny's throat out, and it's a nice couple of panels wherein you see Danny's legs kicking, and then you see his legs stop, and you see his blood just start dripping down his legs, and because at this point Blackout had been holding Danny up, and due to the use of shadow and everything, you get the idea that Blackout had literally ripped Danny's throat out. And so at that point, Blackout's delirious with joy, because it had been a long time since he's fed on the blood of someone who was a straight up mortal enemy of his. And also just the fact that he got to feed on someone who was innocent, more or less, is something that was even more joyful to him. And as Danny's bleeding out and dying, he starts to become delirious, because it's like he's looking down and he can see himself, he can see his body, and he sees Blackout celebrating and everything. But then he's looking at his body and he's seeing that he's got all this blood on him, my blood, innocent blood. And right when he thinks that, Danny's body starts to transform into Ghost Rider. And at that point there was a split between Danny Ketch and Ghost Rider, and Danny's body is still on the ground, and Ghost Rider is basically existing outside of him almost. And and it's really strange, because it's almost like on one hand Danny's still on the ground, but he's also in spirit form, and Ghost Rider is taking a fight to Blackout, and Blackout's freaking out because he was thinking that if Danny Ketch was dead, then Ghost Rider would die as well. But instead, here Ghost Rider is fighting him, and just things don't go according to plan for Blackout. And the two of them, they sort of go back and forth with each other, because Blackout, with his enhanced strength, is able to put up a fight against Ghost Rider. But also, Ghost Rider at this point, since his human host has, more or less just been murdered, his moral compunctions about, killing someone have been removed. And so he straight up intends to murder Blackout at this point. And he's in the process of beating him to death, when a group of law enforcement personnel led by Jackie Badalino come onto the scene. And because they had been called by an agent of theirs who, he and his family had been assaulted by Blackout, and Blackout had nearly murdered one of his kids when Ghost Rider came onto the scene. And so when that happened, he's trying to hold them both off with a gun, and he's telling his wife to, call the police, and namely Jackie Badalino's unit, because they're the ones who are trying to go after Ghost Rider specifically. And so Badalino and his unit come onto the scene, and they just unload all this ammo at Ghost Rider and Blackout. But Ghost Rider takes the brunt of it while Blackout slips away back through the woods. And basically he's kicking himself, because he's basically saying to himself that he more or less just screwed up the one chance he had at having his face repaired, because by screwing over Stern the firm, he not only has he made mortal enemies of them, but his mortal enemy Ghost Rider will surely come after him and kill him, as his near fatal beating had shown. But then he comes across Stern himself, who's basically, got a gun on him. And it turns out that Stern had, in fact, been chewed out by his superiors, and who had, basically, pulled a, what the hell, man, with him, because he's the one who had released, Blackout from their captivity. Even though he felt that he was able to control him, obviously he wasn't able to. And so they punished him. And it turns out that Stern, has something of a supernatural ability in a sense that he's invulnerable. Like, he can't die, but he can still feel pain. And so they use some of their technology to torture him. And then they tell him that we want both Ghost Rider and Blackout back in, in our custody tonight. And so only then will you be able to come back to the fold. And so Stern, after he explains all this to Blackout, he confides in him and says that, yes, the firm says that they'll let me back in, but I highly doubt it. I think that once I bring you in and Ghost Rider, and once they've had their, had all the time they need with the two of you, they're going to basically find a way to kick my, punch my ticket, as it were. And so he says basically the only satisfaction he's going to get now is by killing Blackout. But Blackout, tries to fight back against him, except he doesn't know at this point that Stern's more or less invulnerable. And so while, he's able to cause some pain to Stern, he can't actually kill him. And it's at this point, while the two of them are fighting, that Ghost Rider, finds them after having evaded the police. And he has them both by the throat. And you get the idea that he's wanting to kill them both. But instead, they're found by a police helicopter. And so, since he doesn't want to fight the police, he hightails it out there on his motorcycle with the two of them in tow. And he, blazes, through a Cypress Hill cemetery. And so, since the helicopter saw that that's where Ghost Rider was going, Badalino and his unit, they start combing the cemetery, and it lasts into the wee hours of the morning as they go through all the crypts there, trying to find Ghost Rider. And the last crypt they find, because, that someone heard some noises coming from there, they find that the Cypress Pool Jokers are, in this particular crypt where they're hearing the noise coming from. And the Cypress Hill Jokers, they were a youth gang that had been introduced in, say, like the first issue of the series. Excuse me. So it'd been a bit since we've seen them, but as Badalino and his squad are asking them what they're doing hanging out in a cemetery, and they're like, well, yeah, it's where we usually hang out, and we were going to go home, but then we saw all the police coming in, and so we thought, hey, we'd stick here and wait until y'all were done. And so Badalino, he's pretty pissed because he was hoping that they'd be able to find Ghost Rider and Blackout at this point, but since he just found a bunch of kids, he's like, screw this. And he's like, all right, guys, let's move it out. And so after they've beat the scene, the Jokers, they, get off of the grave off the coffin that they were sitting on in the crypt, which is where Ghost Rider was hiding. And so, so as he thanks the Jokers for their assistance, in hiding him from the police, they're asking him, well, hey, what are you going to do now? And he's telling them that the one person who can help me is in New Orleans, or New Orleans, however you say it. And he's talking about Johnny Blaze, because earlier in the issue, when Danny's mom had celebrated her birthday, Johnny had called Danny to initially, check in on him and see how he's doing, but also to wish his mom a happy birthday. But he was saying, hey, if it ever gets to where you're feeling uncomfortable in your own skin, or you feel like you can't be, you don't feel safe, being around your family because, of your ties with Ghost Rider, your family or friends, come on over to New Orleans where, my wife and kids and I are, we'll be happy to have you over. And so Ghost Rider, of course, having Danny's memories, remembers this, but he also remembers that Johnny Blaze, had a connection with Zarathos, the original Ghost Rider, or the one before him, I should say. And so, he's, telling, the Jokers that he doesn't know what to do, because if he turns back into Danny, then Danny will, surely bleed out and die, because he's still got a, torn throat. But on the other hand, if he just stays as Ghost Rider, then who knows what happens to Danny. And so he tells the Jokers to stay away from the cemetery, because it turns out that he's actually got Blackout and Stern in this coffin together, and I think it was like a crypt or coffin, right? And he uses his chain to wield it in place and keep it locked up. And you hear these horrifying screams coming from the crypt or coffin, wherever it is. And basically Stern and Blackout are trying to get out, but they can't. And then, since neither of them can really seem to kill the other, they're stuck with each other. And so Ghost Rider, he basically maroons them there, and he tells the Jokers to stay out of the cemetery. And he says only after he decides what to do with Blackout and Stern, and once he's done what he's going to do with them, only then will the Jokers be safe to come back to the cemetery. But for the meantime, stay out of the cemetery. And so he heads out to New Orleans, to meet with Johnny Blaze, and Stern and Blackout are stuck in a crypt or coffin, and that's how the story ends. And so I thought this was actually a pretty cool issue. I think that it was a good turning point for the series, in the sense that you had Danny going from having some measure of control of his life to having all that control being taken away from him by way of Blackout. And also just learning that sort of being reminded that just because you're making progress in your own life, that doesn't mean that the damage you've done outside of yourself is going to be fixed anytime soon. Namely, like, say, with his ex-girlfriend Stacy. And so and it was kind of sad, because at a certain point in this particular issue, Danny is willing to share his secret with his mother and his friend Jack, and his ex-girlfriend Stacy, and her dad, who's a captain of the police force. And so but he's willing to share his secret and tell them, this is what's been going on with me this whole time, and I need y'all's trust, and I need your help. And he was going to open up to them, but then Blackout ruined that, not only by kidnapping all of them, but by murdering Danny as well. And so this sense of control they had is gone. And he also is reminded, even prior to Blackout murdering him, that he can't go home again, just like the title says. And I also liked how, in some ways, the title applies to the characters of Blackout and Stern as well, because Blackout, shortly before he rips Danny's throat out, is telling Danny that he wants to go back to the way things were, before he and Ghost Rider ever came across each other. Like, he wants to go back to where he had a good face, and he was confident in who he was as a person, and his place in the world and everything. But Ghost Rider took that all away from him, at least in his mind. And so I liked how there was that sentiment, that whole "you can't go home again" sentiment with Blackout as well, albeit from a twisted perspective, of course, because Blackout is straight up evil, SOB, who deserves his comeuppance. But because of his warped ego, I mean, he sees himself as the victim here, never mind all the people he's killed. And so, and also considering that Stern was literally introduced within this issue, I liked how you have that sentiment with his character as well, because once he screws things up by not only allowing Blackout to leave the facility, but losing control of him as well, and also botching the plans to capture Ghost Rider, Stern is basically exiled from the group until he delivers Blackout and Ghost Rider into the firm's hands. But he's pretty sure that the firm will just screw him over once they have what they need from him, because that's what they tend to do with their test subjects. They're super powered individuals that they capture and study and what have you. They either keep them in captivity or they kill them. And he's pretty sure that the firm has similar plans for him. And so even though he feels that he can't go back to the firm and he can't maintain the status he once had, at the very least he's wanting to make Blackout suffer. But unfortunately he doesn't really get that chance. But like I said, I like how the sentiment of you can't go home again is with his character as well. Now, naturally, that sentiment hits much harder with the character Danny Ketch as well as Ghost Rider, because Danny Ketch, as I mentioned, has lost all sense of control over his life, and he's also lost his life. But you also have Ghost Rider, who has lost a measure of control as well, because he doesn't know what's going to happen if he goes for an extended period of time without turning back into his human host. And he also doesn't know how to save Danny without potentially killing him. And so he has to leave the Cypress Pool Cemetery, or Cypress Hill, the Cypress Cemetery, we'll just go with that, which has basically been his stomping grounds. Queens, has been his stomping grounds. But he has to leave all that, because staying there won't help him, to find out if he can in fact save Danny. He has to go beyond. He has to go out of his comfort zone and into the world beyond, namely to New Orleans, to try and find Johnny Blaze, who's the one person he can think of who may be able to help him, or at least point him in the right direction. So I liked how this theme applies to more than one character. You can't go home again. So good title, and a good compare and contrast to how this theme affects certain characters. And so I also liked how even though this is the first time we see the firm, I liked how they seem to have done their homework as far as what makes Ghost Rider tick. Now, granted, they don't know everything about him because they haven't actually been able to capture him yet, but they've been able to pick up enough to know that Ghost Rider has a thing about innocent blood being spilled. So basically, they use that against him in order to do initially to try and do some damage against Ghost Rider, but in theory, though, to be able to more easily capture him in the future. And so I liked how the book starts off with this sort of roided out mercenary dude with all his weaponry, basically destroying a city block just to get to Ghost Rider. But whenever he tries to use his weapons on Ghost Rider, there's little to no effect. Now, granted, the acid bomb he launches seems to do some damage, but Ghost Rider just supernaturally gets himself patched up after emerging from the acid, or as he's emerging from the acid. And I liked the sort of bait and switch idea that we're initially thinking that we're seeing this in real time, but then it turns out we're watching security footage that was captured by multiple operatives of the firm. And so it kind of made me think of like a found footage type of scenario. And that got me thinking, like, it would be really cool if someone did, like, say, a short film from the perspective of someone who, say, was a criminal who was trying to, run or hide from Ghost Rider, and Ghost Rider is hunting this person down and is unstoppable, and then he ends up capturing the guy, and then it'd be interesting if they had to where he tries to use the pen stare on this individual, and then you see, I don't know, the camera cut to static, which is kind of what happens in this particular story with the character of the technician, because the technician, once he's been given the pen stare, the footage just turns to static. And so I like that bait and switch idea, and also liked how they established that a month had passed since that particular battle between Ghost Rider and the technician, and how in that span of a month, the firm's also been working with Blackout to come to terms about him working for them, in the sense of capturing Ghost Rider and bringing him to them. And so yeah, I liked how it showed that a certain amount of time had passed. Like, this didn't just all happen overnight. But also, I liked the horror angle of the story, which, this being a Ghost Rider book, horror kind of goes hand in hand with it. But I liked how you see that Danny is in over his head, like he's helpless in the situation with Blackout having kidnapped his friends and family members that he's got, and is threatening to kill them. And the creative team does a really good job of conveying Danny's sense of horror and his loss of control over the situation. And harkening back to some of the earlier issues in the series, we see Blackout in a darkened environment, maybe say lit only by the moon, taunting Danny over the phone. And so the artwork, I liked how it was kind of a shout out or callback to moments in the first couple issues involving Blackout's character. And I also liked how there was a sense of consistency in how the idea that Blackout's been gradually gaining greater strength in his power, or greater control over his power, is on hand here too. Because his light dampening ability has been amplified, and also his strength has been enhanced as well, to a point where he's able to briefly hold his own against Ghost Rider just in sheer strength. But so I liked how there was that sense of mystery with Blackout's character that was hinted at a few issues back, but how it's still ongoing, as far as, okay, something's definitely at work with this character, something's making him stronger and more powerful, but we don't know what that is yet. And also I liked, even though it was basically a cameo appearance, Johnny Blaze's appearance in this particular issue was a nice touch, because it kind of reminded readers that Johnny Blaze has become a supporting character for the book at this point, and also how it's consistent with his prior depiction of actually trying to help Danny, and he kind of sees him as family almost. And so I like the sense of consistency, but also just seeing Ghost Rider finally cutting loose on someone, someone who's like not a demon or something like that, but just basically is able to go to town on a living being, and in fact nearly kills Blackout until he's stopped by the police. And so so all in all, I think this was like a good issue. It's a good turning point for the series going forward. I haven't read all the issues that come after this one, but I know that for a time, there's a shake up here, and it led to the Midnight Suns imprint in the Marvel universe. And so it was interesting seeing how all that indirectly came to be because of actions that happened in this particular issue. Let's see, what else was there? Yeah, and I liked just seeing how Ghost Rider was put in a more vulnerable position, and how courtesy of the writing and the artwork, you see his like he has a sense of loss in terms of, his purpose in life now. Because, I mean, yeah, he's a spirit of vengeance, but at the same time, what's more important? I mean, saving Danny or going after more criminals? And so he's having to decide. And so you have this sense of agency about Ghost Rider that, feels in line with his ongoing depiction in his own book at this point. And so, once again, consistency plays a big part. I mean, the elements in this story are consistent with stuff that happened prior to it, but or that was either directly shown or merely paid lip service to. But there are a couple of things that I think could have been better. For one thing, I understand that Badalino has a vendetta against Ghost Rider, but at this point, we still don't know why he's got a vendetta against Ghost Rider. And you would think that, when he got the call from one of his people who was being initially attacked by Blackout, and then Ghost Rider came on the scene, you would think that said agent would have, had his wife, tell Badalino and his unit, it's like, yes, I'm calling you guys because y'all have the most experience with Ghost Rider, supposedly, but Ghost Rider's not the bad guy here. But maybe y'all can help him, to capture this other dude who tried to, kill my kid. And so, unfortunately, we don't get that, though. And we just get Badalino instantly jumping to conclusions and, launching all sorts of artillery on Ghost Rider. And so, once again, much like, the issues in which Badalino had been introduced in, a few issues prior, we have some good action scenes involving his character, or I should say a good action scene involving his character. But unfortunately, though, his depiction as a character, like his personality, is like, if Steven Seagal were playing, the Punisher, like if, Steven Seagal's cowboy cop character that he plays in, a lot of his movies, were played by the Punisher, which is kind of a description I felt, was in line with his character a few issues prior. So at this point, Badalino still isn't really anything special, as a character in and of himself. But once again, much like the prior issues with him, we get a good action scene with his involving his character, in a sense that you have like, his squad just unloading like crazy on Ghost Rider. But the other thing is, I was kind of confused as to, what happened with Danny. Like, I know that he's killed by Blackout, and yes, he turns back into Ghost Rider, but at the same time, on the page, it's shown that, his body is still there, and Ghost Rider is wholly separate from him now. So, but at the same time, we don't, see what happens to his body. So, try to figure out if, the body just, say, vanished on a spiritual level, or this was just something where the creative team, kind of forgot to be a little more clear as to what happened to the body of Danny Ketch, if, he turns into Ghost Rider, and so, as Ghost Rider himself said, I mean, if he turns back into Danny Ketch, he'll bleed out, and more than likely he himself will die too. And so, I don't know, it was kind of confusing, in regards to, say, trying to figure out what happened, in that regard. I just wish the creative team had been a little more clear with what happened with Danny's body. Like, did it just vanish, after being killed? I mean, it seemed like that's the case in terms of the artwork, but maybe some of the dialogue could help as well. And also, and I hate to say this probably shows ignorance on my part, but it was hard to tell at the end, what exactly Ghost Rider did with, Blackout and Stern. Like, did he, have them in a coffin together and use his chain to, keep it wrapped up? Or did he have them imprisoned in a mausoleum underground and he just used the chain to keep the lid on, so to speak. So it was hard to tell in that regard. Like, was it a coffin or a mausoleum that he's got Stern and Blackout in place there? And so while I do like the whole Tales from the Crypt poetic justice type of feel to their punishment, it would have been nice if there had been a little more clarification as to, are they buried alive in a coffin or just buried underground? And so that was the only other nitpick I could think of. But all in all, I think I'll go ahead and give Ghost Rider number 25, You Can't Go Home Again, 4 out of 5 stars. It was overall consistent with the tone of the series that came in the stories that came before this issue, and it doesn't feel out of place at all. And so I also liked how of all the villains that they brought back for this double-sized anniversary issue, it was Blackout that they brought back, because this was a guy who had been on Danny's case since the first 2 or 3 issues. And so whereas someone like, say, Death Watch was a good villain, they mostly worked behind the scenes, whereas Blackout, while he was definitely skilled in the areas of stealth, he always liked to be upfront about his grievances or his issues, as it were. Like, he didn't hide. I mean, yeah, he used the dark to his advantage, but he actually took the fight to Danny Ketch, aka Ghost Rider. And so this was a persistent foe and a terrifying one, and I appreciate that they went with arguably the best villain from the series up to this point to be the villain, the big bad, in this particular anniversary issue. So so 4 out of 5 stars. But real quick, I'll just show you all a couple of things here. Ooh, Game Genie. I've never actually used that, but at the same time, I remember seeing it advertised a lot back in the day. But so yeah, you got extra pop-up centerfold, plus a special preview of this summer's 4 new Ghost Rider family titles, Midnight Suns. So this particular issue, paved the way for the Midnight Suns imprint, which was something that I'll definitely be covering in the future. But for Ghost Rider, there was for Ghost Rider specifically, for that particular book, I think it did more harm than good, but some good did come out of the Midnight Suns imprint. As far as, say, like, you got the anthology series Midnight Suns Unlimited, where there were multiple stories in one issue, and so anytime you get a horror anthology, you're bound to get some good stories, and Midnight Suns Unlimited was no exception. And then you had the first 6 or 7 issues of the Morbius series written by Lynn Kaminsky, and you got some good stuff there. And then of course you have the Darkhold series written by Chris Cooper, which I definitely need to check out, because by all accounts that was like the one consistently good thing that came out of the Midnight Suns imprint. And also, by most accounts, those who have read the Ghost Rider series from the 90s, the first year of Ghost Rider and Blaze, Spirits of Vengeance, was actually pretty good too. So while that particular imprint did more damage to Ghost Rider as a book and a character in the long run, I am looking forward to see how, because of what happened here, we have a new introduction to a new side of horror in the Marvel Universe. So I'm looking forward to things in that regard. But I do kind of wish that Danny had been able to have that sit down with his friends and loved ones about, his, connection to Ghost Rider, because one of the things that kind of, bores me sometimes is, how the main character, if they're a superhero, they're constantly, trying to keep their identity secret from their friends and loved ones. If, maybe they confided in someone, then they could have avoided a lot of, losses to their own personal life. So, I do wish we'd gotten something like that, prior to Blackout getting a hold of everyone. But I'll show you all real quick. One of the things that they did here was they had to sort of, fold out page and pop it up too. And it's actually pretty good artwork, but to me it just doesn't add to the story itself. Like, it's a good visual trick. And that's Danny on the ground with his throat ripped out. But at the same time, like, it looks cool, but it's kind of distracting from, the actual fight and what have you. But I should mention, though, that the artist Ron Wagner did the artwork for this particular issue, and he'd been on the book a couple of issues prior as a guest artist, but I believe it was starting with this issue. Ron Wagner would be the regular artist for the book for a couple more issues. And so, seeing as how I've seen some of his work, especially, those first 6 or 7 issues of the Morbius series, I mean, I know the guy's a good artist, and so seeing his work here was pretty cool too. But here we go. Sorry, give me a sec. All right. Ghost Rider and Blaze, Spirits of Vengeance. I like that little effect with the, light reflecting on the sunglasses. Speak of the devil, Morbius. Eat your heart out, Jared Leto. We got Darkhold, Pages from the Book of Sins. This is sort of a Mike Mignola-esque art piece that I really like. And Night Stalkers. I forgot who these guys are, but that's Blade, the vampire hunter, Wesley Snipes himself, prior to a Wesley Snipes movie. So yeah, I thought that this book, this particular issue, was a good anniversary, double-sized issue, and the double size, kind of, helped sell kind of a powerful story, and also liked how, it's going to lead into other things within the Marvel Universe as far as, the horror department go, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that works. But thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. And you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care, good night, bye.